Hello, welcome to TCAF 2021's Be the Change panel. We're so happy to be here with you today. Before we begin, the Toronto Comics Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Palm Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for this land. We also acknowledge that this area is covered by the Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to take care of this land and each other. This acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live and work on colonized land and is an expression of solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationships with Indigenous communities in Toronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. I am thrilled to welcome to today's panel Ben Sears, Fiona Dunnett, and Kate Reed-Petty to talk about stories and characters that make a difference. In Ben Sears' Young Shadow, Bolt City's neighborhood hero discovers a conspiracy between some trust fund punks and a CEO of a chemical plant. In Travesia, Fiona Dunnett illustrates 15-year-old Griselda's risky journey crossing the Mexico-US border to start a new life. Kate Reed-Petty's The Leak follows student journalist Ruthie and her discovery of and a call to action against corporate polluters. Today, these creators come together to talk about taking action against injustice, no matter how old you are. Thank you all for being here. I know each of you has created a short presentation to show our audience a sneak peek of your latest works. So why don't we go ahead and get started with Ben today? Afterwards, I'll rejoin you to ask a few questions.
For my presentation, I just wanted to go over kind of the steps that go into a finished page. I meant to have thumbnails for this one, but when I went to find them, I didn't have any. So I started with the pencils. Step one, just kind of keeping everything loose, filling it in, like all the details and stuff that makes it seem like a place that you could live in. Kind of marking out all the spots that are going to have like the solid blacks and the text and things like that, and just kind of making sure that when it comes time for inking the next step that I have all my fundamentals set up. So the next step is inking, where I basically just tighten up the pencils and kind of give things more weight with the cleaner line. Make the lettering clear and legible so that everybody can read it. And it's okay if I mess up the lettering to kind of fix it in the computer later. And also keeping the panel borders like keeping the evidence of a human hand, I guess, because a lot of comics have just like straight panel borders and seems kind of sterile. So I like to have mine a little wobbly. So after that, I go to the colors, and for a comic like this, it's like black, yellow, and white. So not much to work with, but I feel like it's easier to suggest lighting with that setup. So that's what I do with the flat colors, kind of go through and like define the shapes of the objects and the light sources and stuff like that. So since this is at night, it's kind of like a harsh fluorescent lighting and then like the underlit city in the background. And it's kind of a place where I can like make everything, give all the objects a little bit more weight. So for example, like all the stuff in this convenience store I feel like I can juice it up a little bit. And then the next part is adding like the shading texture, which again helps define like the weight of the scene and objects and kind of helps set a mood a little bit better. So like since it is at night, you kind of want to go heavy on the shadows and the dramatic lighting. And just kind of layer it on as you see fit. Like I'll add a little bit of the grainy texture, and it's like, well, I could probably take that a little further to get the idea that it's nighttime across. So you just keep layering it, and I don't know. That's for this book, that was kind of the step, was pencils, tighten it up with the inks, do the colors, and then this gritty texture. So relatively simple, but still, like, once you get to the coloring stages, you kind of have more work to do with suggesting the lighting and things like that.
Cool, I will hop in. My name again is Kate Reed Petty, and this is the book that I wrote, illustrated by the amazingly talented Andrea Bell, who really brought this to life. And what I wanted to talk about today, I'll get more into this book, but it is about 12-year-old girl named Ruth Keller. She's here on the cover, and she creates a newsletter. She's an aspiring journalist. And so writing a newsletter, publishing it every week is a big part of her life. And so what I figured I would do for my presentation is talk a little bit about how you can make your own newsletter. If anybody at home is interested in journalism, activism, or even just any kind of topic that you're excited about and you want to share, a newsletter is a great way to do that. And a great way to sort of start feeling how you can raise your voice and be part of the change in the world that this panel is about. So the first big question is, what is a newsletter? And there's a lot of different definitions, but the simplest way to describe it is that it's a publication that focuses on just one topic of interest. So it's often written by a single person or a small group of people, and it's about one specific thing. So I give you that definition, but really you can do whatever you want for your newsletter. It can be whatever you want it to be. I'll give you some ideas to kind of walk through it, but I feel like a newsletter is a great way to be completely creative and really say what you want to say. So my own first newsletter I wanted to share. This is a picture of me when I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And around this time, I started putting together a wild plants guide. I was really excited about the woods and taking a walk through nature. And so I would put these little guides together for my family about the plants that I was finding in our backyard. So that's one example of something you could do. But the more interesting example is Ruth Keller, who again is the star of this book, The Leak. And Ruth wants to be a journalist. And so the newsletter that she publishes is about news stories that happen in her small town. And, in the beginning of the book, they are a little bit sillier. They're sort of smaller kind of stories that she's just kind of excited about. And to be honest, she's making some things up. She's kind of inventing news around. But through the course of the book, she grows and she starts to publish real and actually very serious news about pollution that is happening in her town. But I wanted to share this, first example. This is the first example of the newsletter that you see in the book. You can see here, it's called The Cools Letter is the name of her newsletter. So it's all of the coolest news of the week. Again, this is really Ruth sort of following her heart. And you can see here the big story of this week is a possible alien invasion at a local lake in her town. So again, you can kind of see that Ruth in the beginning is kind of making up the news that she's publishing, or she's embellishing a little bit, we should say. And here's a picture again. Andrea Bell just brought this character and this story to life so beautifully. But this is Ruth looking at her computer, getting ready to send her newsletter out into the world. And then I wanted to share these 2 pages from the finished comic just to sort of get a sense of, how Ruth sends her newsletter out. So in the previous panel, she's just hit send. And here you can see it's going to her parents, to her science teacher, to a boy she has a crush on, to a couple of her friends, to another teacher. And then this character, her name is Sarah, and Sarah is dating Ruth's older brother. So Sarah is in her early 20s and actually works at the New York Times. And so Ruth getting to send her newsletter to Sarah and getting Sarah's kind of mentorship and guidance is a huge sort of event in Ruth's life. So I wanted to give this little example from the book, what the newsletter looks like. But if you want to make a newsletter, the first step to do is to actually brainstorm what you want to write about. So I encourage you, if you're watching this video at home, grab a piece of paper, or if you use like a computer or a phone or anything that you want to take notes on, jot down some notes and just start to think about what you might want to write about. What's the topic that would be important to you? Ruth, again, writes about local news in her town. It could be news and happening at your school, maybe a part of an after-school activity or a recreational center, a tutoring center, a scouting troop, a sports team that you're on, a dance class that you take, music, sort of anything that you're interested in. That's a community that you could start to write about, things that are happening. You can also talk about the specific topic. So for example, my newsletter Doing Wild Plants was one example. If you're really into science or acting, maybe you love cartoons or anime or graphic novels or comics, dancing, music, anything like that can be the topic of your newsletter. It can be something you're learning about. And then also, think about something that maybe you want to do with friends or with, if you have a sibling or cousins or family members that you might want to work with, collaborate with them and think about something you can do together. So once you've decided what it's about, the next thing to think about is who are you going to send this to? So thinking about your audience is an important part of any publication, I think. You might be wanting to say, I'm just going to send this to my friends. You might want to just share with family or friends and family. Like Ruth, you could send to teachers at school or principals, other people at the school, and people at church, after school activities, sports. And one of the things that Ruth learns in the book, and one thing that you can think about too, is that as you start to develop readers and if you build trust with them, your newsletter can be a way that you're raising your voice. You can be sharing stories, you can be talking about things that you see. It's a way to sort of reach people and show that you have something to say in the world and that your voice matters, because that is true. No matter how old you are, your perspective, the things that you're seeing, you can speak up and share those. So when you then, you've chosen your topic, you've chosen your readers, I've offered this kind of like a way to sort of think about it first is to start with one big story. This is what Ruth always does. And then 2 small stories for every issue of your newsletter. That can be a way to kind of help brainstorm new ideas and break things up so that it's not so overwhelming. You can also think about adding activities. Ruth always puts a word search into her newsletter. You could do horoscopes or crosswords or trivia questions. You can also invite reader letters. So you can ask your friends or family to send you letters about, things that they're interested in, and you can actually publish those. That's something newspapers commonly do. And again, be creative. This is not, a newsletter is a completely open thing that you can do whatever you want to with. So if you want to put comics in, if you want to put collage, if you want to put artwork, short stories, anything that you feel goes in there, that's great. Just a quick intermission. If you do decide that journalism or activism is something that you're interested in, I wanted to highlight the rules of journalism that Ruth kind of explores and learns through the course of the week. So I shared this quick panel that is Ruth's mom. She and her mom had this argument about whether or not Ruth is actually brushing her teeth. Ruth struggles to be believed. And so this is her mom kind of like checking her facts and checking that Ruth is brushing her teeth. So I wanted to share this panel as a side as I kind of went through the rules of journalism that Ruth learns. And I'll run through these really quickly, but a journalist is a specific skill. It's something that people are doing to make sure that they're trustworthy and that they're sharing important news. So that means talking to people with firsthand experience of events. So talking to witnesses or participants. Also citing experts. Ruth definitely does this with her science teacher. Offering multiple perspectives. So not only those are the most powerful people, not only the teachers, but also the students. If you're reporting on your classroom, getting everybody's voices in the room is something journalists do. Describing events objectively, sticking to provable facts. And then again, if you get something wrong, issue a retraction, which means you publish something saying, oh, we made a mistake in a previous issue. We want to set the record straight because we believe the truth is important. So once you have all of your sort of content together, I wanted to offer 2 different ways that you could publish. Ruth goes the digital route. I recommend adult support if you're doing this, but there's services like MailChimp, Tiny Letter. You can send just emails to people that you know. And that's how Ruth sends her newsletter out. You can also make a zine, which I think is really fun. So that means cutting and pasting, putting the story together and kind of creating it on paper, and then make copies. You can maybe do that at your school or public library and sort of hand physical copies out, which people really like to get, or mail them. And then again, I put a note in here, remember to proofread, get somebody else to read it for you and make sure everything makes sense. And then finally, once you're done, plan your next issue, because one of the features of a newsletter is that it comes out regularly. So once you've done your first, it's time to start thinking about the next one up. So I hope that was inspiring and exciting, and please do read the leak if you want more information or more kind of brainstorming about newsletters, but that's me. And I will pass it over now to Fiona. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kate. Yeah, so I think before I start, I would like to also mention that I'm speaking from the territories of the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, otherwise known as North Vancouver. So today I'm actually going to tell you about the story that I illustrated called Travesia. And it's a bilingual Spanish and English book. And the word Travesia means journey in Spanish. And it's a true story based on the writer Michelle's interviews with her very good friend Griselda. And she told her the story about her journey crossing from Mexico across the border to the United States through the desert. And I'm going to tell you now a little bit about one of my favorite illustrations in this book. So the artwork that I did was really inspired by a lot of the art that I saw when I was living in Oaxaca, Mexico. And especially the street art that happened around 1 year when I was living there in 2006. There was a large political protest that started with a teacher's strike, and later many other indigenous and other social organizations joined in, and the protest lasted a good year. And during this time, there was lots and lots of street art and stencil art all around the city and all the walls downtown. And so I was just surrounded by it while I was living there, and it really inspired my art, especially the art in this book as well. And I also wanted to bring in an element of Aztec dancing, because that is how the writer Michelle first met Griselda, her friend, who is also the protagonist in this book. They were both part of an Aztec dancing group in California. And Aztec dancing is a really, really old dance done by the Aztecs long, long before the Spanish arrived in Mexico. And it's still very, very important to Griselda today. So I wanted to incorporate Aztec dancing somehow into the illustrations, even though it wasn't really mentioned in the text specifically. So one thing that Aztec dancers are very famous for is the shells that they wear around their ankles. So as they dance, they make a lot of noise and percussion. So that's a very big part of their costume. So the text actually describes a moment in the story when Griselda calls on the fastest messenger spirits of the desert to give her the strength to walk through the desert without feeling any pain. And I wanted to create, so these are two illustrations that drawings that I created, just some ideas. And I really wanted to incorporate Griselda the dancer, Griselda the girl crossing the desert, but also those messenger spirits that helped her cross and give her the strength. So this is the final illustration I came up with, and I'm actually going to read you the passage that goes with it. I began each new day praying. I prayed to all the fastest messenger spirits to give me enough strength to make the journey without feeling any pain. I think we walked more than 20 miles, climbing and descending, advancing and retreating. So the other illustrations in this book that come before this one are actually quite dark in color. And I decided to use bright colors for this illustration because it really pinpointed a moment when Griselda finally stepped up and rose to the challenge to build up the strength to start walking across the desert. And it was a really important point in the story. And the little scorpion over on the side kind of represents the dangers that she was facing, as well as the potential pain she might come across. And so, yeah, that's pretty much my mine.
That is so wonderful, everybody. I enjoyed your presentation so much. There's so much thought and that goes into the process behind what you're doing, as well as Kate, you talked about the steps, like all the steps that you have to think of to build something as complex as a newsletter. That's really wonderful. So I want to ask you all a mix of questions. To get us started on the panel. This one is for everybody on the panel. One of the things that I found all of your books had in common was that the main characters have a lot of courage and a lot of confidence in each of their own ways. Can you tell me a little bit about the importance of these characteristics in your main characters? And also, were any of you this confident when you were that age? Because I certainly wasn't.
I'll hop in first and just say that I mean, Ruth is so the main character Ruth is definitely the 12-year-old girl that I wish I was, or I wish I had been. That I sort of set out to make a really bold, courageous, and committed sort of budding activist and journalist writer. And I think I felt a lot more fear when I was that age, and so I was able to tap into some of that, and she definitely struggles with insecurity and uncertainty sometimes. But I did sort of want to live in that space of just knowing for sure that what you have to say really matters, and being willing to do anything to be heard.
Yeah, I guess I was definitely never like jumping off rooftops and stuff like the main character in my book, but I guess I don't know if it's really wish fulfillment, but like maybe it is wish fulfillment, things that you wish you could do to like help make the world a little bit better. But since mine is like it's not necessarily a superhero comic, because nobody has like superhero powers, but it's that kind of like what Robin would be like, I guess, just like a kid out solving problems. I guess there is kind of like a fantastical element to it, but he definitely is like doing things that I would not do now, or even when I was that age.
Yeah, I'd have to say, for myself also, I don't think I've ever come across any experience remotely like what Griselda had to face when she was 15, crossing the desert. But I feel like with the supportive family, if it really came down to it, I would be able to do something like that. But I also I'd say Griselda, just through the story, really you see she builds up a lot of courage and maturity throughout this whole experience as well. Like even at the beginning of the story, she's a little bit naive. Like she in her hometown, her family is all very sad, but she can't really figure out why. And but eventually, as the story progresses, first they go into Tijuana, she starts to feel kind of get suspicious about all the other strangers around her, and then towards the end of the journey, she really had to like step it up and walk through the desert and be there and strong for her mother and brother. And never through the story did she really go into how scared she was. And I think that's really, really admirable that she rose to the challenge there.
Thank you so much. I want to ask a little bit about each of your art styles. And I know, Kate, you didn't draw the book, but I still want to ask about the artistic process behind it. But first, I'd like to start with Ben, because you mentioned a Robin type figure. And as I began reading Young Shadow, for some reason, I was reading Young Shadow's dialogue in the voice of Batman, like immediately. And so I was wondering, especially since you showed us some of your process pages and these like yellows and darks and this like grittiness, did you kind of draw from the detective type or gothic type tropes Batman stories do when you were creating Young Shadow?
No, because a lot of those are like just kind of rooted in keeping the status quo, I guess. Because Batman is like, I'm gonna beat up petty criminals and work with the cops and stuff like that. And mine is just like a neighborhood kid who is very suspicious of the police and kind of would rather have like a mutual aid system with his neighbors than like have cops come in and kind of tear stuff up and then leave. As far as the voice goes, I think just like a kid who takes things very seriously. So like not necessarily like without a sense of humor, but is committed to like helping other people, I guess.
And it's really interesting in the book that right in between all these several high action fight sequences, we also see young Shadow being an everyday hero. He helps with food bank deliveries. He volunteers at animal shelters. He assists local store owners and his building managers. So how is young Shadow's community service like just as important to his heroic character as the other heroic efforts that he goes to, like surveillance and busing up corporations and all those other high action sequences?
I feel like that's the more important part is, you know, like helping his friend with the food bank delivery. And I think some of the other characters in the book kind of like suggest to him that that might be the way to do things. Like you can't always punch your way out of something. It's like sometimes you just need to like do some like service, not really service industry work, but like, you know, just kind of a thankless job that doesn't involve a lot of action or anything like that. But, you know, he still has all the fights on the side and stuff like that.
Yeah, the kind of notion of heroism changes. Like, for example, Fiona, in your book, you have a hero that is going through an everyday issue for where she comes from in the world and is trying to navigate this through a very internal fight, right? A very internal kind of process. And in the book, you mentioned that the migrant journey is a bit different for women than it is for the men that go through it. And so it's a different kind of internal fight for them. Can you tell me a little bit more about, you know, the challenges of going through this journey that Griselda faces that maybe a male protagonist wouldn't face?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the probably the most memorable moments in the book is when towards the end of Griselda's journey, she gets her period. And I think it's kind of strange. It's something that none of us really talk about, despite the fact that it's a biological thing that half the population it happens to. But yeah, so you don't hear about that too much in news stories. But I think it does help build empathy for because pretty much any female reader will understand that situation of your period coming when you're not prepared, and then you add that on top of, say, crossing a desert, and anyone can put themselves in her shoes. And then of course there's other issues that women have to face, like the sexual assault, and then also the they're often seen to be more easy targets, not for violence or robbery as well. So that's another thing that women and girls sort of have to face a bit more than the men and the boys.
Yeah, it almost makes an already arduous journey that much more difficult to navigate. And one of the things that really struck me about the idea of crossing borders in your text is that you really visualize that in its own way. A lot of the images in the book are surrounded by a type of stitched border, and that unravels as we go. But later, like the image that you showed in your presentation, we get these colorful spreads that are completely borderless from the edge of the book page to the other edge of the book page. So can you tell me a little bit more about these shifts between bordered and unbordered images in your text?
Yeah, well, I'd say the those like full color, full bleed spreads are kind of a layout technique to draw the reader's attention to very important moments in the story. Like for the example that I showed you of her feet in the desert, that was a really important moment when Griselda really finally mustered up the courage to keep going. And so having that full illustration really helps to make the reader stop and pause and think a bit about, oh, what's happening here besides what I'm reading in the text. And then there's also an illustration that comes right after that has no text at all. It's just a scene in the desert that shows the people just walking through in the night, and it gives an opportunity for the readers to sort of put themselves in their shoes and say, ooh, like, how are they feeling right now? And geez, how would I feel in that situation? And then it pulls you right back in the next pages to go back to the panels with the borders going around and it sort of pulls you back into the story so you can continue.
That's so interesting. Kate, one of the things I really loved about the leak was the digital environment that was created on the page. Like, talk about unbordered. You have all of this information coming at you at all times. And so I'm wondering about the differences in presentation in this environment. It's sometimes shown in the book as a tool of support and communication, research and education, but it's also presented as a very real risk at sometimes. So young people now are navigating digital spaces and digital challenges in a way that just didn't exist when I was growing up, from misleading information to fake news to things like going viral as a person at a young age. So how did you think about laying out this digital landscape in your book and introducing the pros and cons of digital spaces throughout the text?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that it is. I mean, I remember being like going on America Online for the first time when I was probably about Ruth's age, maybe a little younger. And it was presented as such a risky world. I remember just lots of adult talk about like stranger danger online, and it was a really scary place to be. And my sense, I have lots of nibblings of nieces and nephews, and their relationship to technology is so different from mine because they have just really been immersed in it forever. And so I think in a lot of ways they have a much more mature sense of what it means to be online. And we've all learned so much, of course, in the past couple of decades. But yeah, there's not the same fear that I experienced, which I think is healthy. But at the same time, they're also aware of the risks that do take place. And I think it's just it's a complicated emotional thing to engage with. It's going to be part of many people's lives, sort of whether they want to or not, and it's going to play some good roles and some bad. And so yeah, I wanted to kind of reflect just the complexity that I see with young people that I know today, and how they're engaging with online spaces. And I've sort of focused a lot on the danger, but I think it can be a real space for connection and political power and self-actualization. And so I did want to reflect some of that kind of joy and self-growth that can happen as well. And Ruth does, Ruth wouldn't get rid of the internet, even though she has sort of suffered because of it in some ways. It's a big part of her life, but it's helped her grow for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that even after she becomes a bit afraid of it, she still persists in her pursuits. And it's interesting because it's through this kind of digital space that we see her form a variety of perspectives. We see her cultivate a lot of different skills. So can you talk a little bit about Ruthie's changing perspective and the importance of using several different tools when you're trying to look at an entire issue?
Yeah, I mean, she does, as I sort of showed a little in my presentation, her sort of journalism in the beginning is a little bit playful and kind of fun. And she just hasn't sort of encountered the really serious issues yet. And, through the book, she has a mentor who is a young journalist, but a professional journalist who kind of guides her a little bit. And yeah, she makes some big mistakes, I think, because she is really committed to to speaking up and to kind of uncovering this pollution issue that she's really hooked into this mystery. So she makes the mistake of barreling ahead a little bit much, and she, like, you know, hurts some people's feelings. She says something, you know, she goes beyond the actual facts at hand and has to kind of learn about that. And yeah, I guess to your question, that the stakes are higher because she has the power of digital publishing, because she can email 80 people at the beginning and then it grows to 800 people. The things that she says take on a lot more weight, and so she has to really grow up to handle that responsibility that she has earned for herself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. With like your text and Ben's text both focus on this kind of social justice angle of what your protagonists are fighting for. And so I'd like to turn to Ben and ask about Young Shadow's kind of working on exchange within his community. He does a lot of lawn maintenance, and instead of paying rent, he gets dog food and toiletries in exchange for helping a store owner. These practices are very communal. They're very sustainable practices. They're very anti-capitalist practices in a way. So what do you think some of these practices are doing with this character, and are they practices worth revisiting in today's kind of day and age and in this digital information age that we're in?
I think so. I guess it started because not to always bring it back to like superhero comics, but the Batman comics in particular, like, money just solves every problem, like just throw some like high-tech thing at it. And I feel like in the real world, when you just throw money at a problem, it doesn't really solve the problem, and it kind of keeps that barrier between you and actually dealing with it. Whereas like Young Shadow, he feeds the pets by helping out with his friend's like convenience store or whatever. So that just builds relationships that wouldn't exist otherwise. Like if he just went to like a big grocery store and got the dog food, like, I don't know, that's a little less personal. And also he just doesn't have any money, so he kind of has to go and do all these things. But I feel like today that's definitely something that I feel like people don't really know that exists. Like you can trade things, like, and just barter services, and or just help people for the sake of helping people because you can. I didn't want to be like super preachy about it, but I did want to include it as like part of the story. Like it's just as important as him punching the cops or something.
That's one of the most important things about building ties to the community, that like right now in this day and age, we are even more isolated than we have typically felt because of the pandemic. So these communal practices, there's so many kind of binaries we need to break into. Like one of the things that Fiona's book actually brings up is that the borders that are happening between Mexico and US are not just political, let's say. They're actually about family and community. You have to cross religious borders, you have to cross cultural borders, you have to cross educational borders, you have to cross legal borders in order to try to establish or reestablish a community. So can you tell me, Fiona, a little bit about this aspect in your book, this aspect of trying to be a part of a new community by crossing these borders?
Yeah, for sure. I know at the beginning of the book, a lot of the illustrations show a lot of the things that Griselda and her family had to leave behind, like, for example, her home and her family, and also her traditions and customs that she could very easily practice without any problems. And then towards the end of the book, in the epilogue, they also go into some of the other issues that come after they physically cross the geographical border. Like they have to face language borders. Like, for example, Griselda can't really speak English very well at the beginning, and economic borders, because she has to help her work with her dad to help pay the rent in addition to going to school. And also some of the borders between even new immigrants and sort of second generation immigrants, which she sort of struggles with in her relationship with her cousins. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that we explore in there, and we're interested in taking it further, perhaps in another book, and exploring what comes after that first physical crossing across the border.
That would be really interesting. I would really like to see that. And as you had earlier said, Griselda is a real person. These are her real stories. And I'd like to turn it to Kate, who uses Ruthie as a fictional character, who is a wonderful advocate for something that she sees wrong in the world. But there are certainly young people out there like Griselda who are making a difference by advocating for important issues, people like Greta Thunberg or Malalia, and more young people are getting involved in the political process. They're starting to try to reform education. They're protesting with Black Lives Matter. They are a powerful source of activism. And so I'm wondering, especially with all three of your characters being so young, how each of you thinks of youth as a movement and as a place of power, rather maybe than sometimes the way it's perceived as a place of vulnerability or a place where you don't have a lot of power. And Kate, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there is something truly radical about youth leadership that, like, I mean, I really, both Ben and Fiona, your points have resonated with me a lot, and like the way that we're all sort of thinking about change. But you know, I think young people feel that so many structures that many of us have grown up with and that have been going for so long it's really clear that they're not working across, you know, racism, economic justice, the climate. There's so many things that I think young people they have very clear eyes about, and I think it's really radical to trust and believe in the new ideas and the like expertise that can come from young people, just because it feels, you know, I think it's the old way of doing things, and it's sort of patronizing to sort of say, no, you have to get 25 years of experience and have a mortgage before we'll listen to you. So I hope that all of our books are sort of communicating that to young people, because I want to sort of give my own trust to them.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that I think adults have a tendency to want to like shelter young people from these like bigger issues, like they think they maybe won't be able to grasp them or something like that. But the truth is, like, young people tend to have a lot more curiosity than adults, and they have a strong sense of like when something is not right, like why is that happening, because it's not right. And I think just the more that we can share these stories and expose young people to these stories, the more likely they are to get involved and make a change for themselves.
Yeah, I think discounting kids' opinions is not good, because they have the most time left to spend on this planet out of, like, you know, everybody here. So if they have concerns, they're probably pretty valid. And even if they can't articulate those concerns, like, it's, you just don't want to like patronize them like everybody else said. It's, I don't know, they're way smarter than most adults give them credit for. But way smarter than, like, I guess the established education system gives them credit for.
And you all raise several similar concerns that are clearly coming to the forefront of being concerns to youth today. Like, two of your works focus on pollution and environmental concerns. We have like legal and geopolitical concerns in some of your work. We have a a lot of things I've seen also recently have to do with like concerns about animals and animal safety and humane treatment of animals. So I'd like to ask you all a little bit more about the central issue of your work and why you felt it would also mirror kids and young adults' concerns today and the current social narratives that are forming around those.
Yeah, I guess I can start. I know that like in the issue I was covering was the fact that so many people are fleeing their countries and immigrating just out of desperation, and that's been happening for a long time. But now with things like climate change and a lot of political unrest and poverty, it's only getting bigger, and it's not going away. And I think even for Canadian readers, the asylum seekers and refugees that come here aren't necessarily from Mexico, but they are a lot of kids are coming from places where they've gone through very similar experiences to Griselda. So a lot of the readers and the audience right now, they may have had an experience very similar to Griselda's, or maybe have a classmate who has had that experience. So yeah, it is really important to build that empathy, because it is a big problem that needs solving.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that question with any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I'll the leak does, pollution and environmental justice is a key central issue. And then also, information and journalism and the sort of difficulty that the press is facing these days, and the importance of that. And I think, I guess with both of those, I think it's important to kind of look, and Fiona, you touched on this, about how many issues are kind of intersecting now, and the things are getting bigger and compounding with each other. And so I do think, I mean, to our previous question, kids are aware of these kind of complexities. And so, the more that work can and stories can embrace a lot of the different difficult issues that we're facing, I think the more it can give them a sort of handle on it. And yeah, and with the pollution specifically in the leak, I wanted to look beyond the, sometimes I think there's some like climate change or environmental issues, conservation issues that tend to feel really big and major and kind of beyond our individual lives, or, beyond our scope to change. And with the leak, I wanted to look at something that really hit home, affects this town specifically. And it's something that is happening, across the country, but it's something that Ruth experiences at the individual level. So kind of bringing these big complex problems, but also showing it something that like you can make a difference within your local community. Even if it feels small, it matters. Yeah.
Yep. For my book, it's not really based in reality like everyone else's is, but it's kind of a escapism, I guess, and maybe how kids might want to respond to the problems that they see going on, but maybe can't do that. I don't know. It's hard to describe it. Basically, just if I was a kid, I tried to put myself in their shoes, and just if I saw someone mistreating a dog, this is how I would like to take care of the situation. And just through like a kind of science fiction-y fantasy lens, I feel like that's easier maybe to get the point across than like a very realistic presentation.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about, because unlike the other two books we're talking about today, your book built its own world essentially. And even though it was this really attractive world that you created and with this sci-fi bent, I also felt it was so real and so personal, like it really existed. So can you tell me a little bit about your thought process behind building the world and the things that you kind of do in that world that maybe you wouldn't be able to do in a more realistic story?
Sure. This book is actually kind of like, it started out as a side story from another series of books that I do. So the world was kind of already established, and it was kind of loosely based on the current world, but way more animated and just kind of weird. I don't know. I tried to make a reality where there's more of an opportunity to react against injustices, I guess. Like, it wasn't a perfect utopian future or anything. Like, it still has the same problems that we have, like capitalism and police brutality and things like that. But maybe in this world, like, you can react against those things with less repercussions. I'm not saying like, react violently, but there's more of a path that you can follow to like right injustices, I guess.
It definitely, as has been mentioned already, like kids and young adults like feel justice and injustice so keenly. And one of the things that Kate, your book really brings to the forefront is, the challenges of not being believed. I was never believed about anything as a kid, no matter what it was. And so it's already hard to convince people that you're telling the truth when you're young. And Ruthie kind of experiences this kind of prejudice or like ageism in the story. So can you tell me a little bit more about incorporating this feeling and being able to show methodologies by which, you can be heard?
Yeah, I share that experience, and I remember that sort of painful challenge of getting grown-ups to believe you, especially if they're, for whatever reason, they're not inclined to believe. Or in her situation, I mean, it sort of starts when she's at the dentist, and the dentist doesn't believe that she's brushing her teeth, and she's like, "No, I swear that I'm brushing my teeth." And and I think all different kids, are believed or not believed for different. There's a lot of biases in our world that some kids have an even rougher time sort of being believed. But you're right, sort of across the board, we discount, as Ben and Fiona, we've all sort of mentioned that like kids just don't get the same credit. And yeah, Ruth does. She does sort of go through some steps to be believed. She manages to raise her voice. She finds these channels. But I sort of always want to sort of tell readers and young people that, sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes people just won't believe you or won't listen to you. And so I encourage kids not to get discouraged if somebody doesn't believe you. And sometimes you can't sort of push them into it. But if you continue to speak the truth and you continue to, not be discouraged and raise your voice, eventually you will be heard, and the right people or the right levels of power, you will be able to make a difference with them. So.
That's amazing. What a great insight. And, Fiona, one of the things that your book deals with is this almost at a systemic level. You almost have to experience these events on your own in order to believe them. But like you say, these stories are infiltrating our communities through our classrooms, through the people we come into contact in our employment, through the politics that we hear on a daily basis. And so I'd just like to pose that same question to you. Like, when you're looking at this personal story in order to show a larger systemic injustice, how can you use even just the medium of books and comics and artistry and writing to be able to be heard or be believed in what you're dealing with?
Yeah, no, I think books, yeah, especially even like illustrated books are really helpful for using in the classroom, because in addition to the text, you have images that you can look at and interpret, and it really helps you to sort of get into their world and step into their shoes, and you can think like, what would I do in that situation? And I think it's really important for building empathy, for sure.
I just want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for being here today as we begin to wrap up this session. I would love for each of you, starting with Fiona and then Kate and then Ben, to please tell readers where they can find your work, how they can get a hold of it, how they can learn more about what you're doing next.
Sure, yeah. Well, ours is published with Arsenal Pulp Press, so you can get it on their website. It's in the new release section. And it'd be also great if you use Instagram, or you can follow us at Travesia Graphic Novel. And we're also on Twitter if you use that. That's just Travesia Graphic. And yeah, we're really excited.
And yeah, thank you for the social media cue. I am also on Instagram and Twitter, and it's at Petty Kate. So my last name and my first name, and I put it in my name on Zoom here. And yeah, the book is, again, it's called The Leak, and available in bookstores. Ask your library for it. I always sort of encourage kids to go to the library and ask your librarians for that. Hopefully they will carry it, and if they don't, they will order it for you. It's a great way to get lots and lots of books.
My new book, Young Shadow, comes out tomorrow from Fantagraphics Books. So you can pick that up, I guess, just anywhere they sell comics or books, and can order copies from me from my Big Cartel site, which is bensears.bigcartel.com. I am at FreeBenSears on Instagram, and I just post, sketchbook drawings and stuff like that on there. So that's about it.
Thank you all again so much for being here and sharing your stories and your work with us. We really appreciate it. We've got many great sponsors that make programs like this possible, and we'd like to take a minute to thank those partnering sponsors responsible for bringing you TCAF's programming. Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation is a partnering sponsor with TCAF. Also, special thanks to the Beguiling Books and Art, Page and Panel, the TCAF Shop, and of course to governmental support from Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and Toronto Arts Council. And stay tuned, everybody, because there's a more amazing YA TCAF programming coming up with Molly Knox Ostertag. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Have a wonderful evening.